अपने साथ ये जो पूंजीवाद सत्ता का जो सोशल स्ट्रक्चर है उसका बहुत सारा बैगेज अपने साथ लेकर आते हैं। इट डजंट मीन कि हम यूनिवर्सिटी स्पेस में आके सारी चीज़ें भूल जाते हैं, अनलर्न कर देते हैं, बट वी हैव टू लर्न एंड अनलर्न अ लॉट ऑफ थिंग्स व्हेन वी एंटर द यूनिवर्सिटी स्पेस। 18-20 साल में जो हमने जेंडर रोल्स जो सेट किए गए हैं सोशल स्ट्रक्चर में, कि लड़कियों को सिखाया जाता है कि तुमको मुंह खोल कर नहीं हंसना, तुमको पैर फैला कर नहीं बैठना, तुमको बर्तन ही साफ करना है, किचन के काम करने हैं, तुम घर से बाहर जाकर काम नहीं कर सकती। तो ये जो सारे नॉर्म्स हैं ये सिर्फ महिलाओं को ही नहीं सिखाया जाता, ये मर्दों को भी सिखाया जाता है कि वो किचन का काम नहीं कर सकते, उनको इमोशंस एक्सप्रेस नहीं करना होता और उनको घर के बाहर के काम करने होते हैं। दे हैव टू स्टेप आउट फ्रॉम देयर होम। तो ये जो सारे नॉर्म्स हैं ये सिर्फ महिलाओं के लिए ही डेंजरस नहीं है, ये मर्दों के लिए भी उतने ही डेंजरस है। एंड वी हैव टू फाइट टुगेदर, मतलब महिलाएं और मर्दों को एक साथ इन सबसे लड़ना होगा। मतलब ये सवाल है कि सिर्फ महिलाएं ही क्यों, मतलब जो फेमिनिज्म का एक कॉन्सेप्ट है जिसको कभी कभी ये भी माना जाता है कि ये पैट्रियार्कल सोसाइटी के अगेंस्ट है, ये पैट्रियार्की के अगेंस्ट है, तो हमको ये सोचना होगा कि इस फेमिनिज्म अगेंस्ट पैट्रियार्की और हम मतलब एक यूनिवर्सिटी स्पेस में आके हम सिर्फ जो महिलाएं हैं वो सिर्फ क्लासेस और अपने रूम्स के बीच में ही ना सिमट कर रह जाए। यू हैव टू बी सोशलाइज, यू हैव टू बी यूनिवर्सल इन यूनिवर्सिटी स्पेस। तो ये चीज़ें हमें सोचनी होंगी और इस पर बात भी करना होगा कि दोस्ती करना गलत है। जैसे जो छोटे शहरों से लोग आते हैं वो थोड़ा झिझकते हैं लड़कियों से बात करने में, उनको समझ नहीं आता कि लड़कियों से कैसे बात करनी है या उन्हें कैसे अप्रोच करना है। तो यही सारे सवाल हैं जिस पर आज हमारे बीच दो प्रोफेसर्स यहाँ मौजूद हैं। She is a professor, NIVEDITA MENON ma'am. She is a professor in SIS, and PARNAL CHIRMULEY, she is a professor in German studies. So हम इन्हीं चीज़ों पर बात करेंगे और
I was talking about how we want to do this session, and see, to be very honest, when we felt that what is there that we can say about gender sensitization that people in this room haven't already heard of or know, right? So one option is for us to begin with comments from you, comments and questions from you about anything that you think is relevant to the idea of gender sensitization. So we could do that, right? Then at least we would know what is it. One of the things is that Parnal at some point will talk about the specific JNU experience of GS Cash, because I came to JNU as a teacher long after GS Cash was set up, and Parnal has been part of the process by which GS Cash was set up. She'll explain, and that will be part of what she'll say. She'll say other things also, I'm sure, but she'll talk about, she was also chairperson of GS Cash at some point. So she will talk about that experience, and also about anything else that she wishes to speak about. So I'll just say one thing to begin with, ki I think we have to stop thinking in terms of girls and boys, Mahila and Mard, what we used to call the women's movement in the 80s. Because remember, I've been around for a long time, and in the 80s, it was, it was all Simone de Beauvoir, a woman is not born, she's made, sex, gender distinction. It was like that was the way we understood feminism. Sex is biological, gender is cultural. That's the way we understood feminism, and that is not wrong. But many things have changed. And one of the biggest things that has changed is that the landscape is no longer a women's movement, it's a queer feminist movement. Because there are now apparently 3 genders bureaucratically, but there is the possibility of multiple genders. In your lifetime, if in my lifetime I've seen this very big change, In your lifetime, in 10 years, you'll be saying, oh, in the 2000s, in 2024, we thought there were X, Y, Z, but now look at the world, right? The point is we don't know what new identities will emerge, how we will be challenged, how we will be forced to rethink our politics. All this is good. That's what democracy does. It keeps you completely and always destabilized. So that is something that I want to say right away. We are not talking about Maila and Mard. We are talking also about Maila and Mard. But we are talking about the fact that there is a possibility of multiple genders, and what does that mean for us? Okay, so we are going to start with that idea. But really, is there, like, what would you say if you had to? I don't want to say some very basic things, I mean, like, I feel that all of you have thought about these issues, and so why don't we start with, let's start at the level where you already are. Let me not do the genders, this and sex is that kind of a thing. So, any comment, any question that you are facing as a feminist today? And I think everybody in this room is a feminist. I'm going to assume that. If some of you are not, say that. Say you're not a feminist and why you're not a feminist. We can talk about that. So let's keep it more interactive. I'm assuming everybody is a feminist. Correct me if I'm wrong. So if you're not a feminist, let's go there. Let's discuss that. But as young feminists, young for you all are. So as young feminists, what is the question that you find difficult to deal with? Not that I will give you an answer, but we can talk about it. So in 2024, you're young feminists, the world is very specific and very different from the way it was even in your own childhood. It's very different from the way the world in which I grew up and Parnal grew up. So what would you say is a dilemma or a predicament or a question जिसके साथ आप जूझते हैं? बतौर नारीवादी, you're a feminist, what bothers you? What is a question that you ask yourself? Or is it very easy to be a feminist? Yes.
Hi. So first of all, I've been in JNU for almost 10 years, and of course JNU gave me a lot of language regarding all of this. And the thing that I think there's a lot of...
Can you hear at the back?
Yeah.
Speak louder.
Sorry. What I deal with on a daily basis now that I have completed JNU, I'm like just stepping out. I think everybody can hear me.
They could hear.
Yeah. I'm more comfortable without
Just
the
speak
mic.
louder. That's
Yeah.
all.
So what I deal with a lot is this gap. So you said, look, we already have a certain kind of language and some certain kind of understanding of what feminism is, and we obviously already understand how that affects everybody, no matter their identities, right? But then I step out into the world, and there is like a distinct gap between the conversation, like this world and that world. And I am constantly having conversations with people who have a lot of questions. Of course, they are people who want to know, want to be, they are empaths essentially. But there is definitely a conversational gap, and like whenever I think about gender sensitization, I feel like that's something I would like to know better, like how to bridge that gap when I'm talking to people outside who might
So the
not be
people
sensitized.
outside are other students or
Not students.
or your
they are
work
colleagues and
They are
like
colleagues,
adults.
okay.
Essentially all adults. Some of them are
students are adults.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was saying. Some
Yeah.
of them are students, but
Okay.
most of them are colleagues.
Okay, our colleagues. How to bridge the gap between the understanding we go with into the world and the people we meet who apparently don't share that understanding.
And people that I don't have a long term with, like with my mother, I've had these 10 years to build and redefine the relationship we had, and our conversations have become different. But with people I don't have so much of that. Like how do I bridge that gap?
It's a good question, but it's more like, I don't see it as a question to which I will give you an answer, but this is something we do have to face. Now, let me tell you a very small incident which I was reminded of as you were talking. I was speaking in, I think it was in a college in possibly Nagpur, I can't now exactly remember, but probably Nagpur, and it was a women's studies course. So you should know that what is called women's studies can be extremely conventional and quite regressive, and it can be very basic, you know. So I was speaking to the faculty, and they were themselves like really just beginning the journey. But even in that course, where they had at least learned that sex is biological and gender is cultural, which I'm assuming all of you understand what I mean. If you want me to explain that, because that's a standard thing you begin with. If anybody needs an explanation of that, please don't feel shy to say, what do you mean by that? So we can come back to that. My point is, it seemed to me to be a very basic kind of a course, and yet the young women that I spoke to, one of the young students said that every day she travels 2 hours by bus to the university and 2 hours back, and every day she sits mostly next to a new person, and she starts talking to that person. और मैं उनसे पूछती हूँ कि आपको क्या लगता है जो घरों में होता है, आपको अच्छा औरतों के बारे में, औरतों की प्रति हिंसा होती है, या फिर आपके घर में कौन खाना पकाता है, इस तरह के सवाल वो छेड़ती है. 2 घंटे ऐसे निकल जाते हैं कि वो जब वो उतर जाते हैं बस से, तो वो कहते हैं मोस्टली वो यही कहते हैं कि बहुत अच्छा लगा आपने हमें, तो अच्छा हाँ तो इसके बारे में हम सोचेंगे. My point is that even the most ordinary, basic, for me it seemed to be any JNU person would say, oh, I thought this kind of women's studies shouldn't be done. Just even that made such a difference, first of all, to her confidence, कि वो पास बैठे अजनबी के साथ मर्द हो या औरत हो वो छेड़ती थी एक conversation. So my point is that even a brief interaction with someone who gives you a perspective different from what you think, and that this is not true only for gender. Someone is sitting next to you and someone you meet and they say something regressive about reservations, or every interaction matters. It is exhausting to live in the world like this, but it's worthwhile living in the world like this. It's exhausting because you don't let anything pass. We should not let anything pass. If anything is said, and that can happen inside JNU also, of course, you don't just say, it's okay, I can't be bothered, I'll be polite, it's my cousin's shadi, no, cousin shadi nahi karna chahiye. So this is our politics. This is our politics. We may not ever be active part of an organization, we may not bring about a revolution, take over the state, but we are bringing about a revolution. How is it that between the 1980s and 2024 I am living in such a different world, where we have stopped saying women's movement, we say, how did that happen? Right? It happened because of this upsurge of political movements which forced us to think differently. So every encounter your colleagues have with you matters. We don't, and it will make them uncomfortable. If they completely disagree with you also, they'll go home and they'll say, उसने मुझसे क्या कहा? कोई तो सुन रहा होगा. In their house, somebody will say, अच्छा मैं इनके साथ अभी नहीं बहस करूँगी, लेकिन ये तो सही कहा था उसने. You know, so it matters. Every interaction matters. It's not about bridging the gap once and for all. It's about continuously producing a counter-hegemonic worldview, so that the comfort that people feel in their worlds. And okay, so I did notice you, I'll come back to the corollary of this is that we should also be prepared to be destabilized. It's not a one-way thing, it's not that we figure it all out और उनको uncomfortable बनाएंगे. हम भी uncomfortable होंगे, हमें uncomfortable होना चाहिए. ऐसा नहीं हो सकता कि हर चीज़ पे हमारी समझ बिल्कुल सही है और ठीक है. You know, we also have continuously a lot to learn. In your deathbed, you have something to learn. So we have to be also prepared that what we thought of as very commonplace, suddenly someone says something and you realize, oh, that is the privilege that I have. or you realize, Acha, I didn't think of it like this. So you have to be prepared to be destabilized. Yeah, what will you say?
I will just start
Oh, you were stuck in my head. Okay.
Actually, I just want to go back to the basics a little bit. When I came to JNU in 2017, I was so ingrained with gender norms and normativity that it took me a while to unlearn that मैं जब घर जा रही हूँ तो I don't have to do the house, I don't have to wash the utensils only. Why is it that my brother is asked to go out to get vegetables while I am always asked to sort of cook the food or take out the utensils? And when I came to JNU, I thought that most of the professors were meeting or even activists at that point of time were meeting. They were functioning with the assumption that हमें ये सब पता है. But at the same time, in this very university, we see the DJ culture, which has just gotten, I think, worst from bad, when songs that are played like completely sexualize everyone's body. And this is also the campus where on a day like Holi, the most progressive men are also tearing each other's shirt, right? And I know that, I'm sure you're aware that from Ganga to Chandrabhaga, the Senate school, boys have this culture of sort of marching in a shirtless sort of a parade, which is a thing for them. And this is also the campus where movies like Animals or songs of animals are celebrated. And when kya dikkat hai? It touched me because the struggle of the father and the son, it is real, it happens. So I feel like we need to go back to the basics again and again all the time for us to understand what feminism is really. Like when we are saying that we are standing in a queer feminist movement, like I know in 2017 Kaushal and I were batchmates, and I know that most of the people did not know how to approach them, how to talk to them, right? They would just be like, and these are students who are progressive. They are students who are not right-wing. They are students who are not against women. But they did not know how to approach them. This is also the campus that I've seen students coming to SL, like right after, from small cities, small villages, and getting intimidated by looking at a woman in shorts and smoking. Right? So I feel in this room, I don't know if people will be that comfortable, but I feel we need to touch base a little bit with all of these to sort of then move ahead on the question of why it's a queer feminist movement, what pronouns are, just what patriarchy is. A simple question like what patriarchy is actually helps resolve so many questions in our head, right? Because I have noticed that in this campus, spending so many years, that men coming from small cities, they find it very intimidating to talk to women. In my own organization, I've seen men who are very intelligent, but the moment they see a woman, they're just too scared to approach them, even politically, right? So things like that, like why are
the
they
women?
scared?
Are they afraid to approach men?
Yes,
Because
a
both
lot
of
of
you
times.
talked about, you also talk as if your subject is a male, and वो लड़कियों से बात करने में कि लड़कियाँ क्या झिझकती हैं लड़कियों से बात करने में? तो ये झिझकना, see, I see what you're saying, but the culture you're describing, let me call it the Sainik school culture, right? I think that because that's very much something that has been, it's a demographic change that has been brought about in India. It hasn't happened accidentally. I think you all know that. It's like when you settle Palestine with Jewish settlers, right? It is a settlement. Let us not be under any illusions. It is meant to change the culture of JNU. It has not happened accidentally. The influx of Sainik school students and their confidence in bringing that culture, you have to keep your hand down. It's like she's constantly doing things with her hand. I'm like, yes. Okay, so, sorry, I know, please wait about as much as you like. So now, I think the fact is that still, most people in JNU still are actually uncomfortable with that Sainik school culture. Now, what am I calling Sainik school culture? It is militaristic, it is masculinist, it is exclusive, because it's exclusivist. It excludes. So militaristic, masculinist, exclusivist, pretty much are some of the key characteristics of patriarchy also. right? Because militaristic is not just picking up arms, which is very much a part of this culture. For example, under the current NEP, NCC is being given a very, very high grade. There are actually courses based on NCC, where you're taught to use. You can opt, even if you're not in NCC, you can opt for that course. It's not happened here, but it is happening in many universities. So to militarize society is basically to create an undertow of violence, right? So if you as all of you know, in the US, it's easier to buy a gun than to buy certain prescription medicines. Like you can't buy medicines without a prescription, but you can walk into any shop and buy a gun. That has made America a violent society. And the reason why that law is there and the reason why it is defended is because it's a racist law. It's meant to protect whites from black people. So militarism, if I just say militarism, it's not only about the army, it's not only about the military, it is about the creation of a society in which violence is normalized. And the potential for violence is always just below the surface. And that is the story of patriarchy as well. So if you say, what is patriarchy? Patriarchy is very much the structure by which masculinity is powerful. Masculinity is placed at the top. So masculinity generally means mostly men. So it is a fact that it is mostly men. But masculinity also means that there are many men who are not comfortable inside patriarchy, who are made to feel marginal, who are made to feel less than, etc. So this culture, why is it that when Sainik school culture enters JNU, more and more people are not joining? Only Sainik school people are joining. Most of you feel repelled. Most JNU students feel repelled. So I think that repulsion or that sense of revulsion comes from that. And when I say masculinism, I'm not saying masculinity alone. I'm talking about that kind of very masculinist power, production of power, where it's self and other, where you continuously create the enemy. So, for example, a very, very typical masculinist text is V.D. Savarkar's Essentials of Hindutva, if you've read it. The whole point of that is we have to feel so much difference from the enemy. We should continuously avoid any kind of similarity with the other. You have to feel they are completely different from you, and that is how you will build a nation. That is how you will build a Hindu nation. So you have to continuously say how different the Muslim is from the Hindu. You have to keep repeating that. So masculinism involves all of that. Now, so I think so that's one kind of thing, that you come to JNU and you experience a culture that is not that, because people have, for generations in JNU, faculty and students, work to produce a space in which this is continuously questioned, which is not to say there is no patriarchy among faculty, which is not to say there is no sexual harassment on campus. Alas, that is not true. Sexual harassment is quite common on campus. But given all of that, the fact remains that there is a continuous counterculture. There's a continuous counterculture. And that counterculture is what we want should prevail. Now, that's one kind of thing. The other kind of thing, since you said it, since both of you said it, this business about feeling shy about approaching, well, you know, when you say they feel shy, let's assume that desire is not so binary. If boys feel shy about approaching girls, let's not think of it like that. People feel hesitant to approach one another in terms of more than friendship. In terms, that is, you don't know how to approach someone in terms other than friendship. I don't know. It's not something that you know. It is something we learn. And we learn by being open to the other person responding or not responding. So it's not as if someone who has lived in Delhi knows how to approach. In fact, a lot of people from Delhi might think they're very confident, but they may be completely encroaching on someone's space with that confidence. So that opposite is actually the more of a problem. If people are shy, at least there's that space for someone to step forward. Like if I'm shyly standing here, you can say, I'll step forward. But if I'm like going to encroach on your space, then you have nothing to do but step back. So shyness is okay. Shyness in all people is okay. And I think what we need to do is we need to make the space by which we can talk about these things. And that won't happen in a space like this. That will happen among friends, among small groups. I mean, you could have a reading group. You could just have a group where you meet weekly to talk about just desire in concrete terms or abstract terms, read a theoretical text, talk about an actual incident, right? So that we use those continuously. Norms have to be reproduced. Norms of how to be desiring of someone without encroaching on their space. So I think we need to do that. So I was thinking if there's another, yeah. No, I mean, I want it to be back and forth, so I'd like her to speak. I'll come back, but I'll take this, yeah.
Yeah, just one question, and it's basically in two parts. So, as a person who believes and identifies as a feminist, but coming from the identity which I've also grown up with, and also for the socializing perspective, most of my friends also are from the cis heterosexual male background. Now, when you start understanding societal issues or patriarchy has created the issues, you understand the importance of allyship. But that's a question which I keep on wondering more and more as the discourse keeps on increasing. It was a feminist movement, now it's a feminist movement. But how do we imbibe ourselves to be the better allies? From the perspective that we come from the identity, who are the oppressors? So that is the first question. How do we increase our understanding of better allyship from the identity which we come from? And the second question is, most of the people who come from the identity which I belong to and who are not from the social science background, academic background as such, or even activists, there these conversations are negligible. And when the moment you start talking, which is something relevant to the society, you start talking about patriarchy, either there is no cognizance with those questions or those issues, or there is just denial. It's very difficult to strike a conversation among people like that. So how to do that?
So one is about allyship, and I think possibly most of us in this room, and I certainly include myself, most of us have one identity of privilege. It could be caste, it could be class. I think everyone can be broadly. The fact that we're in a university, that we've reached JNU already gives us some privilege. So I think all of us have some experience of privilege, and some of us have more experience of privilege. And I think allyship would, I see there's no answer, right? I'm not going to be able to say how does one ally, but one has to be open to continuously talking. I came across this very interesting phrase in Naoki Sakai's, this Japanese philosopher's work on translation, and he's talking about translation, but he says this very interesting thing about community. Because he's saying translation, we shouldn't think of translation as just, and it's an interesting metaphor to use in this context because we are trying to translate our norms for the Chinese school culture kind of thing, right? All communication is translation, in a way. So what he's saying is that we should think of translation as always incommensurable. It's one community of foreigners and another community of foreigners. The communication is not smoothly passing between two homogeneous units. There is a continuous failure to communicate, which we should just recognize. Now, in that context, he says a community is not one in which we all share the same values, but a community is one in which we recognize we don't share all the understandings and so on, and you continuously, you're living in that heterogeneity. Okay, so I found that very usually, right? Because if we assume that it's a community, even when I said we're all feminists, for example, in this room I'm assuming, I'm aware that we might all be feminists, but there are many, many things on which we might agree, not agree, many, many issues. I can't even begin to. So we are a community not because we have shared values. We are a community because we are aware of our differences, but we want to try and communicate. We want to try and communicate with the knowledge that we might fail to communicate. And that failure to communicate is something we have to constantly work with. So allyship will involve that. Attempting to communicate, failure to communicate, recognition of privilege, self-privilege also, but recognition of privilege by everybody. There cannot be a situation in which I don't think allyship is possible if one side of that conversation presents themselves as entirely victim, right? There has to be some point or some element of connection with privilege that they also acknowledge, and of course the people who obviously have privilege will have to acknowledge. So I think that sense of attempt to communicate, a sincere attempt to communicate is what can make for allyship. But that allyship will never be just clean and done and now we are allies, right? Which kind of, if you think of any election scenario, not necessarily the elections that are ongoing now, but even in JNU, everywhere, how do you build we call it a common minimum program. And that's a new development. So it's not like I will march with you if you agree with all my 10 points. Are you pro-trans, anti-capitalist, pro-secular, pro-ecology, all those 10 points, if you're not anti-war, etc. If you're not with me all the way, we can't march together. Rather we say, are you with me on 2 points? Let's take those 10 steps together. Then we do our different things, right? That's the learning that most in the last 10, 15 years, that's what even the left has learned. I'm saying even the left because the left is notorious, and I consider myself part of the left, notorious for saying, no, you have to be 100% pure or I will have nothing to do with it. We no longer think like that, right? So allyship is built out of that sense of probability. How to start conversations with people who are not interested, you can't. See, like we began with that question, that how do you talk to someone who is, like if that girl from the college in Nagpur, if she had said something to the person and that person has said, look, I'm not interested, अभी मैं बहुत थकी हुई हूँ, मैं सिर्फ खुद के बात देखना चाहती हूँ, तो फिर और कुछ नहीं हो सकता उसका. So if someone is completely not interested, then you can't. But if there's a group of 5 people and you start a conversation and 4 people are like, I can't be bothered, one person might relate. Or the one person may not relate today but might think about what you said and seek you out later. Or that person might never seek you out but will quietly go read or talk or think. So everything we do makes a difference. Every small thing we do makes a difference. I met, and I'll just stop here because I want to, at least come back, it can be I met a young person who said how you were talking about Kaushal, but this is another young person who dresses in a kind of non-binary way, very academically, and they said that they feel sometimes quite scared on the metro, because sometimes they sense a kind of violence or implicitly. And I said, I can understand that at one level, right? Being a woman who is like assigned gender female at birth, and I perform the female gender. I know what that means to be somewhat scared. But what I was telling them was that your presence, that person's presence on the metro is emboldening at least one other person every other day. Somebody is looking at them and thinking, oh, they can do it, I can do it. Right? And their presence is making somebody else feel safe. So it's worth it. It's worth it every time we go out on the metro at 11 looking like women. You know it's a bit dicey, but your presence is making someone else feel safe. I think we should feel I think it's really interesting to hear from Parnal how the whole GS Cash thing began, worked out, etc.
Also this thing about ally. I mean, you can decide for yourself that you want to be an ally, and as for conversations, how you conduct them. I've been told when I'm outside campus, and this includes the generation before me, you're at home now, this is not JNU. And don't use terms like patriarchy and so on and so forth. But I've heard this often enough, and
I'm sorry, I just want to look at you. Yeah, I'll just share. I can share. Sorry, I wanted to look at your head. You don't see it.
So I've heard this through my time in JNU, and we came from that point to, let's say, I'll give an example. My father read something that I had written, and he whispered to my sister, "What exactly is patriarchy?" And my sister sort of gave him a scolding and said, "You've lived with us for so long, how is it that you don't know what patriarchy is?" Then he takes the pacha or whatever that we'd written to my mother, and my mother she reads it and she's quite pleased, and she asks my dad, "What do you think patriarchy is?" And he sort of timidly says, "Well, I think I know what it is, but I can't tell you what it is." So these are the conversations. So when it started with, you're at home and don't act too smart, and so it's a longish journey, but it's a journey that is marked by a number of conversations. And to answer your question, I mean, you can decide for yourself that you're an ally, but you can't tell people to be allies, and that's a transformative process that can, but a good occasion for starting a conversation, whether anyone is interested or not, is really popular culture. So you don't start with, here is a copy of Engels and you must read it, but you should ideally say, what do you think of animal? And just gently ask and see where the conversation goes, and that's really your entry into, and I think most of us, or at least those of us who grew up on heavy doses of Hindi cinema, most people are ready to start with a conversation there, and just to say, just to sort of speak to what you've raised, when I, in my MA, I remember I came from a girls' school, and I have only sisters, and when I came to campus, having to interact with men constantly seemed like an irritating interference, frankly. And I mean, I did. No, I mean, not anymore. It did feel like and it was not a shyness, it was in fact, there was I don't know if you've heard about this, we had, there was this whole debate around whether or not men should be allowed into women's hostels on hostel nights. And our wardens who, there have been some wonderful scholars, women we absolutely loved, but they were like, no, we can't allow this. And we remember having this debate, and one of the women who wanted, an open day on hostel night said, "Ma'am, all 4 feet on the ground, we promise." And but there were other women who said, this is one space that we think it's ours, and we don't need it. I mean, in class, in canteens, or at the dhaba, we're all together, but we want to let our hair down, and we just want to come sit tired, be ourselves, where we don't have to think about being women all the time. And so I want my hostel to be that space. So and these were feminists. So the feminist opinion was kind of divided on this. Also so I remember when I was a student, the entire battle was around, should gates be closed at. So there were instances of, in Unica and even on campus, some disturbing instances of sexual violence actually called for, even our wardens who, great sociologists and all, they thought perhaps it's safer, and they tried to explain to us, this is for your safety. And there was quite the rebellion where, women would come at 2 a.m. and the chowkidar would offer to open the gate for them, and the woman would say, I'm sitting right here outside the gate with my boyfriend. What are you going to do about it? So these were the, those little events and questions that we were struggling with. And I don't know how things really work now. What you said about the masculinist, it's also about control, and it's nothing new. And we found that control could often be exercised not by locking up gates at 8 p.m. but also through institutional responses to what people face in an everyday manner. So, I remember there was this one time where a case that today, our common sense today says this is sexual harassment, had to go to the proctorial body. And of course, because these bodies represent the university, there was this sense that we have to take care of both parties and essentially let it all simmer down and, paper it over. And, these, when more of these instances piled up, we realized that something specifically addressing gender and sexual harassment has to be in place. And then, then the conversations around how the institution should respond to what we face, those conversations started. On the other hand, of course, there were, from everyday life, like you just said, we wanted to also understand our own situation. So there were a lot of small feminist groups who would organize readings, and people's own poetry would be read. There would be film screenings, and there was not a standard pattern which would help us understand all questions around gender, but people picked up, and popular culture was always part of that. I remember, at least when I was a student, people didn't use the term rape culture often enough, and today I find they do. A lot of my male students also use the term, and it always surprises me. How nice. But to actually recognize it, and I don't know how it was for you, but when I was in my postgrad days, we didn't have the terminology through which to address any of this. But we realized that, very visceral responses to, let us say, Shah Rukh Khan's वो कौन सी film थी तू हाँ कर या ना कर?
Dar.
Yes. And then there was another, where is the stalker? That song. There's this song. Huh? Yeah, there's another. There's a film called Anjam.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So of course these films were quite popular and had received fair reviews, and we realized that there were a few of us who were feeling uncomfortable, and we weren't able to decide why we were feeling uncomfortable. And it was conversations around all these things that really started us off. Also, there was, for most of us when we came to JNU, it was, we are away from home, we are getting to interact with, people from other genders, and we are free to do so, also meant that those interactions were not free of tension. And so negotiating that everyday aspect of life was also one big part of really asking ourselves, who are we in terms of gender, who are the people around us, and what is the basic minimum. So what we call consent today perhaps would have been called safe boundaries, don't step on my toes kind of situation then. And I've realized that this, why queer feminist is also, gender has different expressions, and there is, if your mindset is even minimally liberal and democratic, it's required of you then that you do not become the cause of repressing different kinds of gender identities. At least that is the first step. So in in the initial stages, it was a whole concoction of popular culture, also of what is being taught inside classrooms. So, in fact, Pratiksha asked, how many of you start your course with a feminist reading? So, ask people who teach philosophy or sociology. You realize, yeah, you realize. I mean, even people who look at art closely, it's all the big names are men. Most theorists in our respective disciplines are men. And one of my colleague and a friend actually posed this question after an important sort of discussion on campus that had happened after a major incidents of violence. And the question is really what are we reading in class, and how visible is the question of gender at all in class. It's not about women facing whatever it is at the hands of men. It's we no longer look at it like that. But really, when do we foreground the question of gender at all? And that's a question inside the classroom, that's a question inside hostels, in our everyday life. So the beginning of some sense of we need a set of principles that will look at our conundrums, and where we can't actually lay out clear black and white rules on how to interact with each other, but there is an understanding what this should be. And when those boundaries are transgressed, then we need something that is outside of us to, well, again, not control, what is a better word, but to redress. Yeah, as a redressal. And in fact, the conversation started around having a redressal committee. They were actually calling it, having a redressal committee. And then slowly we realized that the university can't be asked, the administration can't be asked to give us a pattern, a set of rules that would help us resolve, the sexual harassment in everyday life. And this required feminists, even of different points of view, to sit down and ask each other what is the basic minimum we can start with. And of course it grew from there, and not we, but people from different groups in this campus actually built a set of starting principles for how to understand sexual harassment, and how to actually take up the question of redressal if something comes up. Also, the sensitization part of it was actually more important than addressing the strange legal quantity called sexual harassment. So it was everyday conversations in all centers. In fact, at some point, the GSCAT made it mandatory for all centers to hold an orientation, where a lot of centers would grow, where we have to do this, because their respective chairpersons would have to start it. And I've noted, when I was in the chairperson, I would write to all, when I was chairperson of GSCAT, I would write to all deans and chairpersons of individual centers, please hold your orientation programs. And only occasionally would I hear from one or two of them who would say, will somebody from GSCAT come and do this for us? Mostly I could hear these distant groans where people are saying, we've got too much on our hands, don't ask us to talk about gender because we don't even know how to. And the sensitization thing became really quite important, and we got a lot of help from feminist groups in the city who, I remember there was a set of skits and programs where, something like, you must have heard that thing about tea, like in the Indian context, where if you have a guest and if you offer them tea and they say no, then you're hardly likely to, and if and so if your guest is asleep, then you're even less likely to shove tea down their throats, and that's how consent works. So a lot of these really quick and easy to understand materials were produced for us, and people came and generously gave their time to come to campus, and it became really easy to see what was being meant, to understand that gendered identity works differently for different people, what being queer means, and in fact, when questions were asked of us, I remember the earliest encounter with queerness was not because somebody stood up and said, I'm queer, but the questions that were asked of us. I mean, do you think of yourself as a woman 24/7? And what does it mean to be a woman or a man to you? And a lot of these questions that can at first glance seem disturbing and disorienting, because if somebody asks you, who are you? Then you give them your name, but that's your name. I like watching films, but that's what you like doing, but who are you? And these are disturbing questions, but I remember facing them all the time from friends, from faculty. So I found that some of what happens in class, some of what happens outside the classroom, some of what happens in this strange friction between people coming from different social backgrounds, it's actually an eye-opener for at various levels. In fact, this thing you said about shyness. Shyness actually is the first step also to curiosity at one level, where you said, it's at least, there's a space where you don't encroach. Well, class is an important aspect of, I remember being told, oh, but you're from Bombay, what's your problem? You don't understand a lot of things that people face. And I would say, but I grew up in a strict household. Even now when I go back, I have to be home by 10 p.m. I mean, it makes no sense, but this is how I grew up. And I thought, growing up a woman in a big city where I never went out to play, I never went out unaccompanied. And I thought growing up in a city was the most unfree way of living. And when I had this sort of thrown at me, you're from Bombay and what's your problem? This is privilege really as it comes. That's, these, sort of exchanging my place with someone else also taught me a lot about privilege and gender. And I realized also that thrown into this mix, the clear definition between someone from a Mufassal area who's a man and someone from an urban region, all these seemingly clear boundaries started to dissolve. And when all of this comes together, I think the first thing that is displaced is our own very binary notion of gender, right? So when all the conversations that happened around popular culture, classrooms, what people are feeling themselves, and other things. It was initially it was thought of as a body that is meant for women, and it will only address what women face. And in fact, when I became chairperson, I realized that the team that had worked before me, it had taken them a very, very long time to understand that a complaint that had come to them was not a complaint that would have been addressed better by a proctorial body, because it was a complaint that came from a man about several other men in his hostel. And that team actually teetered on the brink of sending it to the proctorial committee, because it took them a long time to understand how this was also happening, because gender has played an important role. So a way of exercising control, a way of demeaning, shaming, all of this was going on. And it was a different kind of experience to recognize harassment happening in a homosocial situation, which is a men's hostel. In fact, there was, while cases would come to us, we would have to sit people down and talk about the nature of friendship. Friendship, you can be friends with somebody and it's possible they don't want to be friends with you, and your goodwill doesn't mean that you have rights and a free pass to conversations, sending SMSs. The mobile phone was a new thing, and we had to explain to somebody that repeatedly texting someone is really violating their space, because they have no control over the message coming and dropping on their phone, and their phone is their space, and you can't do this. And it was bewildering for people who heard this for the first time. But over a long period of time, I think people have come to understand that the smartphone in your hand is literally you're holding a whole world, and that use has to be careful. So it kind of spreads to other aspects of life, how do we use social media? I believe, stuff happens on the JNU page. I mean, I don't follow it, but I believe things happen, and there is a frisson of concern on what are the rules that govern me responding to somebody's post on social media. What do I put on Insta? Do I need the consent of the person who was with me in that frame to put something on Insta? I think today with the different kind of media that we use, it doesn't mean that society has had that transformation, but at least some of us with access to media, with the opportunity to think and a kind of presence of diversity around us, I think it's become more, not easy, possibly because you're telling me that in Holi stuff happens. The other thing is, it's not a Sainik school thing, because I remember there were, this is a Holi thing, where even left activists, there was a thing of tearing off each other's shirts and having them dangle from trees. And
No, it's a
thing, huh?
I read about it, yeah. I read that this is a tradition.
Yeah, to fling it into trees, yeah.
And it's not a good sign to see, because
I'll give you the other side. So a friend of ours who was a well-known left activist, and he kept scurrying away from other men trying to grab his shirt, and when somebody at the end of the day laughed at him, he said, I can't do that, I don't have biceps and six packs. So this was the other side of it, really, and we had to tell him, but and we got completely tied up in trying to strike a balance between why this tearing of shirts and hanging them on trees is problematic, but also him saying, but I'm not muscular, how can I have my shirt torn, kind of thing. That was also strange. But yeah, so
questions. I'll join you, but if there's someone who can say more. कि कपड़ा फाड़ होली करके, this is a tradition in some parts of North India, and I'm not sure, just because it's a tradition, sati is also a tradition. So tradition, it doesn't protect it, but I have a feeling there's also some kind of cultural gap between this very particular way of, if you look it up online, you will find it. But obviously only men do it, and which means that that space is being masculinized and made uncomfortable for women. It's being made uncomfortable for men who don't want their shirts to be ripped off. So I don't know, it's worth looking at it more and learning it and understanding where that's coming from. It's not coming out of your right, it's not coming out of a particular school or something. It is something in North.
Is feminism mean that we resolve our enjoyment? I mean, if men are going to women and bringing their desires and enjoyment, then why?
Okay, no, it's a good question. Why? So I think the issue is that in an overall sexist society, which I think will agree that it is a sexist society, in that overall sexist society, unless there is comfort in that group, it is very intimidating and sometimes terrifying to see men take off their clothes. I think you have to understand where that fear is coming from, right? For women, where that fear is coming from. So if one group's enjoyment, after all I could say, I mean I understand what you're saying. Like supposing you say that we have a public space, let's say we are drinking alcohol, I'm not going to talk about university space, but somewhere we are drinking alcohol on a terrace, let's say, of a housing society. So, in fact, this happened in my housing society. A group of friends were, including myself, we had a party on the terrace. Now, if anyone who lives in a multi-story building knows that the terrace is a common space, but the terrace is also used by the top floor workers. So this was the top floor house, so she had a party, we were drinking. And later the managing committee like sent a stern letter, we alcohol was served. And we were all very like shaken and surprised, oh my God, we didn't realize that. And then we discussed this and we said, oh, what if it was a bunch of men drinking on the terrace? How safe would, because I mean, East Delhi is like it's a very broadly safe space. Women are walking on the streets at 11:30. Inside the society, girls are going for runs at midnight because it's, how safe would I feel if a bunch of men were drinking in the parking lot or drinking in the... So I think you have to be aware that men's enjoyment, because this is a sexist society, can produce fear and can produce anxiety, can produce a sense of lack of safety among women. So if this has to be done, some kind of conversation has to happen before. That conversation has to happen before. So in fact, when Parnal was talking, I was actually thinking, what would be really interesting is if, okay, we know that GS Cash is gone, we have to try and get it back, we have to try and get India back, that's a whole different story. But we have to try and get a lot of things back, including MPhil program, by the way. But, which I think is absolutely crucial. It's very depressing to have told you. That's another discussion, but whether GS Cash comes or not, and ICC is very, very limited. We all understand that, we all know why. What we can do, and I think it would be very interesting if the Students' Union does it, is if you just set up a group of 50 people who will go and conduct random meetings in hostels, at Ganga Dhaba, at wherever, and say, let us develop norms for behavior on this campus, which are anti-casteist, anti-classist, anti-sexist. What would those norms be? So like you have a group like this. 3 students from that group of entirely student group. Okay, what are the norms? And you count the 5 or 6 norms, including then these kinds of questions. So then what about us? Can't we enjoy ourselves? Okay, how to enjoy yourself in such a way that it doesn't impinge on other people's sense of safety. So if you have a drive like this over the next, like after now it's summer vacations, but at the beginning of July, let's say, or August, whatever, and you develop these norms and then you just have like 50 points, 25 points, right? And it's all over the university that these are the norms that we follow. I went to, you've all heard of the Free Library Network? Okay, that is something, I will give you contacts, the union should, ISA should invite people from the Free Library. So the Free Library Network is a worldwide movement, but it's a huge movement in India to set up free libraries. Now, your library is not free. It appears to be free, but you're paying fees for this university. So no university library is free. There are no free libraries. So the idea is that you have free libraries, and whether it's someone like me earning a professor's salary or it is the daughter of the person who cleans my house, everyone should have access to the free library. And there are many actually existing free libraries now. There are 3 at least in Delhi. So I went to one of them. So this is called the TCLP, the Community Library Project. It's in Khilki Village. If you're on that side, go drop in. So what happened, when I went into those spaces, I went into 2 such libraries, I realized they had, that's where I got the idea. They have like a list of what we have to be here. हम ऐसा नहीं करेंगे, हम वैसा करेंगे, and these are all young communities. So this is not in middle class localities. One is in Khilki, one is in Nizamuddin Basti, not Nizamuddin West Wings, but Nizamuddin Basti, Khilki Village. One is in South Extension, but it actually draws in not the big South Extension homes, but the working class people of the area. And you have these young people who are taking you around, and it was so exciting. She tells me, this young girl, so they don't have access to universities, they don't have access to libraries. So she's explaining the project to me, and she's saying, ये मुफ्त है, ये free library है, free 2 मायने में है, free मतलब मुफ्त, लेकिन फ्री मतलब आज़ाद नहीं. मतलब my रोंगटे खड़े हो गए. What a way to put it. This young woman, the way she put it, that's a culture. So then she showed me this list of, so because people who come into the library are anybody. So how are they supposed to behave? So I'm thinking this is actually one interesting thing you could consider.
When we were in our masters, so when this DJ culture had got into the study, we actually made a list of songs, which are Bollywood songs, peppy songs that people can dance on, but at the same time, does not infringe on sort of our, body, doesn't make us feel uncomfortable because we also want to dance, we also want to let our hair down. And this is a whole movement. We went to all the hostels, the hostel presidents, we put it up in school areas. But nobody, not a single hostel, not a single DJ followed that list. In fact, in CHS, when we were throwing a farewell for our seniors, and we made this, that was the time when we made the list. And the men of our class actually said that if we want to dance on high heels, then we will dance on high heels, and you will not tell us what we can dance on and what we can't dance on. So, wishful thinking was there a lot on our part also, but none of it actually materialized in the end, in any of the hostels or any of the DJ clubs.
So I don't know, we had the same issue. A friend of mine was hostel president in Gulabari, and they tried something similar, and Choli Ki Piche was quite the rage then. And it was placed before the student body, please don't play this song. And it was taken very seriously by the person who made the proposal. Nobody agreed. Women didn't agree. And the hostel president resigned, and so we kept her company. We sat behind the mess where the song was being played. Everybody was dancing to it, and we just ate fruit cream and just sort of, what do you do?
Okay, look, I want to make a counter with this. I think there is quite a strong feminist take on such songs, including Choli Ki Piche.
Yes.
So, for example, what is interesting, like JNU has written on this, there are two versions of Choli Ki Piche.
Yeah.
One is the two women singing to each other, and one is the man singing. And she says that the two women singing to each other is not the version you get to see. You get to see the man singing it. But the way in which one feminist take on this could be, on all these kinds of songs, could be that you own it. You own that song. For example, you were saying screening of anime. I should screen anime. Screen it and have a discussion. Screen that film and have a discussion. I think it is a debatable film. It's generating so much discussion. And if you show animal, a lot of students will come. And then you have the discussion. You say, what is the problem? Right? And you conduct a serious discussion, because the answer cannot be, because we cannot ever take the position of banning a film or banning a song or banning a book. We have to produce counter discourses. We have to, so if, for example, if there are, I would say that, I don't know exactly what the DJ culture implies. I mean, if there's a way in which women are made to feel uncomfortable, apart from the playing of popular Bollywood songs, Kajra Day, for example, I don't know if you consider that problematic. Choli Ki Piche, there's been like really interesting feminist work in film journals about how Choli Ki Piche can be read as about female desire also. So it doesn't have to be that, and I thought it was very interesting that Parnal brought up popular culture, because popular culture is the way to raise a lot of these. So if you say, for example, that you can only play these 20 songs, it is an issue. It can't work like that. How will you say you can only play these 20 songs? It has to be some other way in which everyone feels. So the work is bigger than just producing a list. The work is, okay, and let's have a discussion, why does the song make us feel uncomfortable? And maybe some kind of negotiation and compromise, right? Some kind of conversation has to take place. So I think if you think about doing this what are the norms by which we want to live on this campus. One of them would be continuously checking in with one another about whether this is comfortable or not. So I think one needs to not give up just because, I mean, I know because I think Parnal and I are not exactly the same generation at all. She's much younger than me. But we both I think traveled this journey of a kind of feminism which was anti-pornography and tearing down posters that was seen as pornographic, etc. to thinking about pornography differently. How to think about pornography, how to deal with it as feminists, so continuously how to produce counter discourses.
So while with some songs, of course we can, but say there's a song called Tu Haan Kar Ya Na Kar, Ya Meri Kiran. That's a complete violation of concept. There's no way you can say that you're going to own it. Or there's a song which is that popular.
Look at the regressive values. That was not too untruthful, I think. No, what I'm saying is that we cannot assume that I'm suggesting a more strong sense of a feminist self, which is not so destabilized by, I mean, we could laugh at this nonsense. There's a way of engaging. I think by now everybody understands that these kinds of words are making light of a very serious issue. But listening, we have to make a distinction between listening, at any rate, let me put it this way, this is worth a discussion. You could have, the next discussion could be just with students, among students on how do we engage with music, what about American rap? I find some of that incredibly sexist. So how does one, I mean, you may not arrive at an answer, but it's an interesting, why don't you have a discussion on, and maybe get someone like JNU to speak to JNU, professor at Jamia. She's crazy funny and she makes you laugh a lot, but she has very, very interesting things to say about songs like Stereotypes and a discussion on pornography. So you should have these discussions. And an overall position would be, I think, a better position would be how to produce counter discourses rather than like it to Nakar Kiran is also a man's name. You can do things with it. You can do things with that song. You can do other things with that song. It can be a fun song. But I know why you're uncomfortable. And I think this is what my response was also. It is not fun because we live in such a violent society. No, your hand, I don't think it's like you cried wolf too often. She's cried wolf too often. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, next after.
There is always a dilemma within me that as a feminist or anti-casteist, these values which make me progressive, if I practice these things, I feel alienated from my society, from my Masi, which I belong to.
If you practice anti-casteism and anti-sexism, you feel alienated from your society.
From my society and my family also. This is every week that if you can marry other caste, they are afraid to. I mean, these kind of things, so I leave this. I personally leave this and say that I should have enjoyed myself. Even though I am not sexist, I am not making these songs played because I want to make them feel afraid, but I want to enjoy. I mean, if I practice these, I personally feel uncomfortable because I don't engage with my people. If these people have genuine people, if I interact with them, okay.
Are you from JNU? Are you student here?
I am DU student.
So DU student.
Yeah. So I am saying that if I interact with these people, okay, they would have conversation. But I would have conversation with my Masi friends. They would say, "Yeah, तू ज़्यादा intellectual बन रहा है, you कर रहा है." These things are said, and I feel like.
देखिए ये आपको एक निर्णय लेना होगा at some point आपकी जिंदगी में आपको एक डिसीजन लेना होगा और वो डिसीजन होते होते बनता है. ऐसा नहीं कि आज आपने डिसीजन लिया आ जाता है, थोड़ा थोड़ा करके डिसीजन बनता है कि आप किस समुदाय के साथ जुड़ना चाहते हैं। और एट सम पॉइंट यू विल हैव टू डिसाइड कि ये मेरे लोग हैं या ये मेरे लोग हैं। और अगर आपने ये निर्णय लिया कि वो कास्टिस्ट सेक्सिस्ट समुदाय मेरी दुनिया है, ये मेरे लोग हैं, तो बेशक जाइए उस दुनिया में। और नहीं, आई एम सेइंग दैट you will be uncomfortable with either this group or that group. You have to decide which discomfort is better for you, which discomfort makes you a better person, which discomfort makes you a happier person. Are you happier being sexist and casteist? So, alvida. If you are happier being casteist and sexist, तो फिर एक point के बाद I will have to say I cannot have any conversation with you, है ना? But I think that the way you are asking questions, you are going through a manthan, you are going through a turmoil, you are going through a. I appreciate the fact that you are here. You are saying ये JNU के लोग. See how I suddenly realized you are not from JNU because you did that ये लोग और वो लोग, मेरे लोग और ये लोग. लेकिन आप आ रहे बार punishment लेके JNU.
Actually, I'm not thinking that ये अलग लोग हैं, वो अलग लोग हैं, but
नहीं, absolutely. You said I feel uncomfortable with my people. So look, what I'm saying is, if you feel a certain, यहाँ आपसे आपको यहाँ मतलब आप नाम से यहाँ meaning JNU, you get certain ideas, you get certain something that makes you feel uncomfortable. As I said, feeling uncomfortable is very good. सबसे पहले I said that, right? I hope I will always find situations which make me uncomfortable, and that will make me grow. Now, what you have to figure out, and this nobody can do for you, कि अब आपने ये सब सुना, अब कहाँ जाएंगे? Do you think you will fully enjoy yourself with a group of very masculine men saying इसको देखो, इस लड़की को देखो कैसे चल रही है, ये वो? You feel very comfortable. You won't feel. वहाँ भी अब आप uncomfortable हो गया. So you have to choose कौन से discomfort से आप आगे बढ़ेंगे.
actually तो पहले भी थे, but instant pleasure मिलता है. पहले भी discomfort में थे, but instant pleasure मिलता है.
उसमें pleasure मिलता है और इसमें नहीं मिलता है.
इसमें अंतरात्मा होती है कि ये सही है.
You will have to figure this out. See, no one can answer this question for you. But pleasure बहुत है feminist दुनिया में रहने. I can assure you, even the men in this room and the people of all genders in this room, there is something very beautiful about the way feminism reconstructs a new world for you. It is good for all of us. If you don't feel it, then as I said, be happy. What can I say?
Just to respond. So this thing about your friend saying to you intellectual बन रहे हो और क्या तो, but that's one kind of response, and that response is not guaranteed over all the conversations that you will have with them in the future. I've always been surprised when I've made a judgment on, oh, these people won't be interested in what I have to say. I've always been surprised because there might be 1, 2, 3 people who might listen. This is another thing that you remember those after the JNU violence, the sensitization thing that we had. In fact, when violence happened on campus, a lot of students had this, moment of breaking away with families who were calling all of us anti-nationals and urban naxals and all of that. And many students reported and said we had such fights with family members on large WhatsApp groups, we've left. But we realized that you should, and students also pointed out that those who had the patience to stay on those WhatsApp groups and intervene a little at a time, they found that there was somebody in that large group who was curious and who was listening. And they recognized the potential of that much interaction. And there were students who didn't ditch their WhatsApp groups with family. I have ditched all of them. But there are people who haven't. And there is that possibility of one person being curious and listening and asking themselves the same question. डोपामिन हिट चाहिए या मुझे अपनी अंतरात्मा के साथ रहना है कल सुबह तक?
Ma'am, one of the question that was raised regarding Holi, that guys usually tear up their clothes and all if they walk naked in the parade and all. So the thing is that it is said that women are uncomfortable out of it. So what if the men start raising the same point that we are uncomfortable out of it? So it is a very subjective term. So instead of that, if it could be looked at individual level, that if they are enjoying, but if they are crossing your boundaries, so you can communicate, say like, hey, like don't play around me, or you can play away from me. So this kind of individual communication, because all of these things are subjective. So if you can convey this to the very person who you are uncomfortable seeing around, that would be much easier rather than recognizing as that completely uncomfortable or kind of putting that limit that you can't wear that or you can't wear, because that is equally like you are binding girls, similarly you are binding up the guys. So and second, and so what I felt is like the ability to say no and the ability to communicate that see I'm uncomfortable here. So if this can be inculcated in girls, like how they can convey no in a more assertive manner, that would be much better. And also second point that I would like to raise, like I have always like came from a girls' school, then a girls' college, and this is first time in a co-ed space. So back then I didn't have any norms, but while coming to JNU I developed lot of norms. Like people are saying we learned lots of gender norms, but I learned lots of gender norms which I find very difficult. Like for example, a guy is looking at me, but I can't look back at the guy that who is looking at me, I'm curious. It didn't mean that I'm interested, it's just that I'm looking, who is looking at me. But it is said that if you look at the guy, that means you are giving the hint that you are interested.
This is a very interesting point actually. All the points you're making are very
And
interesting.
also like in case if a guy invited you to see his room and you just took it as invitation and you went, and if the guy tried to get heavy on you, then you have given the hint just because you accepted the invitation. Because you're implicitly saying that if I'm coming to in your room, that means I want to do something or I'm interested in you. No, I'm just accepting an invitation to see your room because room is like the home of ours, right? So these things I find very problematic.
No, so this is actually, the first thing you said is actually very interesting because, so these are, look, this is that community I was talking about, the community of where you are not able to just resolve, there's an incommensurability, right? So she's kind of, I think, suggesting that we don't want to accept any norms for how women should dress. And then what do we do about this situation? How do we convey? And I think what you're saying is you need dialogue, you need conversation, you need to be able to say what is comfortable, what is not comfortable. And the fact is, I'm reminded of, see, the fact is we don't live in an equal society. So a whole bunch of men marching like that is intimidating in a way in which a lot of women in shorts marching will not be intimidating, right? I remember a friend of mine when I was here in the 80s, JNU was then there was a, what is it called, mixed hostel. There was one mixed hostel where, or no, it was a men's hostel, whatever. The point is one of my MA classmates said that he was coming out of the bathroom in just a towel and some girl was coming into the hostel to meet a friend, a male friend. And so it's not mixed, it was a men's hostel. And he said, I didn't know she was coming, but I didn't care because she's the one who was embarrassed. You see, the point is, either way, if she had been in a towel, she would be embarrassed. If he was in a towel, she's embarrassed. The person who's embarrassed is the woman at seeing a naked man or at a man seeing her naked. Right? So, so I think there is that element of the way in which shame is produced in this society, in which you can't equally place a woman wearing so-called scanty clothes and a man, and men not just wearing shorts, but in this particular mode and on Holi, which is so violent that the university shuts down the university one day before, right? Because Holi is a very violent, sexist festival. Women don't go out except they stay within them. So you have to, it's not just men marching in, it is Holi, it is Purana Mano Holi hai, it is that old culture of sexual harassment where you just stop going out the day before. Okay. But I see what you're saying, it needs conversation. But this last thing that you said, that you learn gender norms in coming into a co-ed space, this is something which I think anyone, I also studied in a girls' school and a women's college, I think we learn to be quite independent and you know, I think was a person who said that you're just, it's your space. And you're absolutely right. I'm reminded that I came to this university and the faculty of my center, who none of them are there anymore, spoke in such, it's not sexually harassing, it's light, very light, treating you very lightly, commenting on, like the faculty commenting on you in a very light way or condescending way, where the, and then literally I was like Robert De Niro, I was like, to me like this, I've just come from a place where I'm taken so seriously, I've never experienced this before. So this is actually an interesting point. This is why there's a very strong argument for women only. And then when you come here, you're told all this. So this is something which as norms you have to develop. If I come to see your room, I'm coming to see your room. That's it. If there's something more, that has to be discussed. If I'm looking, if you look at me and I look back at you, there's been a mutuality. Aage kuch hoga ya nahi, both of us have to decide. So that kind of a culture has to be built up. So I do feel that building up 5 or 6 or 10 rules by talking all over the university would actually be an interesting exercise. You know, I think I'll have to go. Maybe we just take, there was a hand there, we've already spoken, I'll just take her and yeah.
So as ma'am mentioned that patriarchy is controlled or is manufactured from generation to generation, we see it particularly in the point that in terms of punishment. So if you break away from any gender role, we are constantly punished for it, right? But recently something that I've observed that it gets manifested also by pampering the gender. So a friend of mine, she was used to going away with a driver, and there was this one time, like a lot of times she stopped going out because there was either no driver or her brother or her father to take her out. So I told her that this is something that they are making it dependent on them, but since it was not in the form of very strict condescending tone or punishing her that if you're doing a little something wrong, they are doing it in form of pampering, and this is something that I feel that you don't understand how these gender roles get manifested when it's done in the form of over loving the daughter or so how do we start the conversation around that? Because a lot of girls also they miss one understanding that as constantly manifestation of patriarchy.
No, I mean it's
Then I tell you why. Because
no, I think it's very easy. It's very easy because you see, you can't address it till the woman feels there's an issue. Suppose if she doesn't feel there's an issue. This is what Foucault taught us. One thing Foucault taught us is you know there is power when you see resistance. So if there's a woman who's completely prepared and happy to have her brother drop her everywhere and her father drop her everywhere, and she only when she reaches that point where she realizes that she is held back, will she be willing to listen to you? So don't bother. Don't bother with, this is what I'm telling all, don't bother with people who are completely 100% happy where they are. If they show the slightest discomfort, that's where you finish. Because if they're completely happy with their people, like you said, right, then I'm not going to go talk to some Thakur who thinks ki aurtein mere jute tale. Why should I bother? I'll try to rescue his daughter if she feels like being rescued. But what I'm saying is that yes, I would take what you're saying as a comment. That patriarchy functions by smothering also. And that usually happens in upper class families because you need to have those resources. Yes, so I think I would take that as a comment that patriarchy functions both through violence and through smothering. And one of the reasons, of course, is because they want to protect the woman before handing over to the husband the next thing of the month. So there's that. So unless she's uncomfortable, you can't convince her, and there's no need. Why don't you turn to all the women who actually are feeling uncomfortable and want conversation? You can just take the last.
Throughout the course of the lecture, we've been having conversations about how communication can be established, and we portray the person we are talking to, even in our anecdotes, as people who might listen or are just either ignorant or just not up to the level of understanding of the subject. But there is a completely different category of people who are not just apathetic reactionaries, but actively ideologically opposed to whatever we do. And the problem therein comes that, so with online forums, since everyone's anonymous, it allows you to say things you wouldn't say offline. And so you get this in-group mentality of everyone, there's other people like me out there with these extremist views. And our parents are especially susceptible to fake news propaganda because they are not brought up organically in the internet generation as we are. And so when we have things like an algorithm which could radicalize you, or like Edward Bernays' ideology which could radicalize you through propaganda, is there any value to the idea of de-radicalization when it is your younger cousin or your loved ones? And is there any value to the idea that you can engage with these people who are definitely going to push back with much more force than the average person on a bus, say? And is there a 12-step structured alcoholic recovery program sort of a thing? And on
I like the empathetic reaction.
Or should I just say something? See, I do believe that if there is someone who is actively ideologically opposed to whatever we stand for and believe in, I don't believe a conversation is worth our while. Because we have limited energy resources, we have limited emotional resources, and it can be very, very devastating to continuously encounter that. So I would, this is not one answer, right? My point would be, so I would say one is to mobilize, there's no point, you cannot convince that person is not there to be convinced. That person is there, or those people are there to flood a particular thing with comments and so on. So one response is for us to flood back, right? So I would say, I'm not on social media, but I read a lot of comments on Facebook posts, and I read a lot of comments on YouTube, and I find that the BJP IT cell kind of response, it's so obvious. They hate Deepika forever. And then you'll find some innocent person saying, why do you all hate Deepika so much? I feel like the same JNU, right? So, Deepika is a bit chiso, Now, you don't have to respond on that post. But like if that's a campaign you'd like to do, then you reframe. You put our comments right there, back. So that's one way of responding. That's a war. If it is about ideologically committed people who are committed to everything we are opposed to, then it is a war. It's not about convincing. The convincing can only happen if there's space, if there are cousins and uncles and so on, right? Who are or friends, or someone who's saying I'm confused, or someone who's saying. So I think I would not waste any energy trying to win over. I would try to defeat them in argument. So, but sorry, I just want to just add this, and then the other thing I realized is that we need to be out there as people from JNU in all our ordinariness. See, I've been teaching for 40 years. Parnal has also been teaching. We used to just teach in our classrooms, and that's who we were. Like students knew us. Who were we? Who was Kanaiya? He was just a student, right? You should have seen him in his first year. Such a sweet, shy person, didn't know. They made him, no? They made all this, they did this, right? Now, my point is whenever then, I'll give you two instances. Maushami Basu, Professor Maushami Basu SIS, took a bunch of JNU students on a field trip, CPOD does field trips, to some place outside Delhi. And they've always done it, but post-2016, post-COVID, the first time. And she said they were all like, you go to a local community, in Rajasthan, I think I forgot. And is anyone from Sipodia who went on that?
It was in Punjab, Fazilika they took it.
So maybe that must be it. The point is, she said they were all like, अच्छा हमने सोचा JNU के students हैं तो पता नहीं क्या होंगे, इतने सुशील, इतने interesting, इतने respectful. So when they actually meet you, you're just ordinary people like us. Like Anupama Roy. When Anupama Roy went to speak at a college in Delhi University, and they said to her, "Aap JNU ke professor, you know Anupama, you know how soft spoken she is, right?" They were like, "Aap JNU ke professor hai?" Achha, I went to speak in and I'm not soft spoken at all. You all know that. But I just did some talk on gender, feminism. I didn't pull any punches. And members of the faculty there came up to say कि हमने सोचा था कि आप पता नहीं कैसी होंगी, लेकिन आपकी अच्छी निकली। तो मैंने कहा कि मेरे दोस्त होंगे, आपने सोचा, वाकई सोचा। But when they meet us, we are just this. We are these people. We are just ordinary people with different views. So I think it's important to also engage wherever you are in ordinary ways, in all our ordinariness. We are just ordinary, right? So that's the other thing. So in response to you, I just want to say this, that we can't convince those who are ideologically opposed, just as they can't convince us. But people who were ideologically opposed to us do gradually shift in our direction. Purushottam Agarwal was an RSS member. Bhavan Mehtamshi was an RSS member. And they shifted in, and of course people in our direction were the other. But then that journey has to be.
I just quickly respond to what you said.
You were talking, Professor, about cutting off loved ones as well.
No, I don't recommend it.
Cutting off meaning she left WhatsApp. She didn't actually cut them off, she just left the WhatsApp.
I mean, it's everybody's choice. I mean, if loved ones become so insufferable that it's just to respond to what you said. I mean, if your query is specifically around social media, there's this thing that we all have to be a little circumspect about the power of social media and our ability to intervene and stay in the midst of that maelstrom. I have found myself at least not, stepping back and getting this strong feeling that it's an echo chamber. So while it is being flooded, and you might, and I've seen friends around me who are politically active who are on Twitter and keep responding to things, and it can lead to a mental state which you cannot control, and you have to decide what your limits are. And 5 years ago, I would, if I heard the phrase "pick your battles," I would have reacted and come out in hives. But today I feel really big saying you have to, and with a certain sense of distance vis-a-vis social media, because there's really a real world also out there, and not all of it is, at least in this region of the world, not all of it is defined by what happens there.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद दोनों स्पीकर्स को यहाँ पे ज्वाइन करने के लिए और आप सभी को। और जैसा कि हम समझते हैं कि एक वर्कशॉप से या एक सेशन से ये तमाम जो सवाल है वो समाधान नहीं हो सकता है, और इस प्रकार के कार्यक्रम को और कराने की ज़रूरत है, और सिर्फ आयसा की तरफ से नहीं बल्कि हॉस्टल्स में, ताकि इस कैंपस को, अपने क्लासरूम्स को और हम इसके बाहर अपने समाज को सभी के लिए सुरक्षित बना सके, और इसकी एक जंग और इसकी लड़ाई जारी रहेगी। आप सभी को ज्वाइन करने के लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। शुक्रिया।